Hey y'all, this is Daniel Oliver again, and today I want to talk about what I should say or what can be said to a person who's raising biracial children. And the two races that I'm talking about are specifically when one of them is African American. So it's really talking about dealing with the identity issues and how they apply to the current situations going on in the United States. And I think current is a misnomer because, yes, the wave of protests and outpouring of support from around the world, as well as all the other reactions that are going on, are somewhat unique, but the underlying causes are not new at all. Um, just to give some background, I am a person who's raising biracial children. So obviously, one half is African American, and my wife is from Pakistan. It just so happens that my children are, in my observation, racially ambiguous. For whatever reason, they don't resemble biracial children in the sense that you can often tell when a child is half African or half African American, half African descent, let's say, um, because they'll kind of look like a blend of, you know, European and African features. So they may have the same hair texture, but it could be a lighter color, or it could be somewhat less coily in texture, but it's of a nature where you usually don't see that unless the person has some mix of African, but you wouldn't see that in an African person unless they had some European or East Asian, South Asian, etc. I've been My children were born and raised in Arabia and South Asia, and to be honest, they basically look. There are plenty of people in Arabia or South Asia with the exact same hair as them, same skin color. Quite often, they have darker skin color than them. Arabs and South Asians tend to be quite dark, and of course, there's a spectrum of skin color. Um, so, just to talk about what experiences they may have had, um, I think one of the first things, one of the cutest things was when my eldest daughter was learning about ice cream. And so we were usually just giving her vanilla ice cream, but we were calling it ice cream. We weren't calling it vanilla ice cream. So she only knew of ice cream as vanilla, and she'd already been introduced to chocolate but we called it cocoa. So she could barely talk, and she said, Baba's cocoa and Mama's ice cream, and her baby way of saying ice cream. And we just thought like, oh, like she noticed, like I'm the color of chocolate and my wife is the color of vanilla. Um, so we knew even then that obviously, just in the same way that a person can say when they're learning their primary colors, that's red, that's blue, that they were aware. Um, so that's kind of, like I said, about the first anecdote when we realized it had become an issue for them. Um, I've been a university teacher most of the time that I've been overseas, and that actually universities tend to be very international, cosmopolitan environments. So um, there were always biracial children of any description, around, in addition to every other kind of child. So, you know, um, half Afro Canadian, half Japanese, for example. You know, Afro Caribbean slash Canadian slash Japanese. um, you know, black Brits, white Brits, Nigerians, um, half white and half like Indonesian, um, people from South Asia, Arab kids. I mean, just anything you could think of, that's always been there. So it hasn't really been a situation where they've seen there's a dominant majority and there's a little bit of everyone else, and either you can fit in and you have to reach out to not stigmatize the others, or you're one of those who have been stigmatized. So in a way, they've been sheltered quite a bit from racial tension. And it's really just been something that we could talk about by saying we don't treat people based on the way that they look. And, you know, skin color doesn't really have anything to do with who a person is. But again, it's more just been they will see people who look different and they might say, "Oh, that boy is so white." And actually, it was there was an albino in one of my daughter's classes, and so I didn't know what she meant until I saw the class picture, and I was kind of like, "Okay, well, I mean, I hope you're not like, you know how you got to teach kids like, don't point and talk all the way out loud about someone when we're out in public. You know what I mean? So it wasn't so much a racial thing as don't point out someone who has an unusual appearance. And you know what I mean? So I haven't ever been of a mindset that let's just, let's pretend that the ideal is the reality and therefore not acknowledge the reality. I feel like they're probably too young at this point to understand police brutality. It would have to just be something that I just crash the subject, meaning you over there in America, where I'm from, because of the way I look, or people who look like me, this is what happens, you know. And for them, I think that would be hard for them to comprehend because they have Pakistani relatives who are, medium brown, maybe a couple dark brown, different hair, all the way to, very white skin, basically, European looking. And they have my family members who are, African American. They have cousins who are African American and West African who have come to visit. You know what I mean? They have pen pals who are African American. So it would kind of be hard for them to just think like, why? You know what I mean? And then what would I say? Oh, but that probably wouldn't happen to you because even though I look like this, you don't have this feature or that feature or that feature, so no one would know. You know what I mean? Because it is kind of that way where I think if they weren't walking around with me or even with my wife, it would be hard for anyone to guess, you know what I mean, what kind of background they have. It could be very easy for people to assume that they're local, if nothing else. You know what I mean? Um, so it's kind of more something that my wife and I are aware of and that we talk about amongst ourselves. I remember one time we were about to walk into a mall and a woman was standing next to her child, like just standing at the curb right outside the door of the mall. And she said, I didn't actually catch what she said. She said something in Urdu, Hindi, which I understand, but I just wasn't paying attention. You see what I mean? Like someone I don't know is speaking, whatever. But my wife caught it. She, that being her language, it's going to be something where it's, a little bit more difficult to filter out, even if you're just like walking past it, you know what I mean? Whereas I have to kind of like tune in if I want to catch what somebody's saying in that language. And her daughter was in a crib. This other woman's daughter was basically like in not a crib, I'm sorry, a stroller. And when we walked by, we went into the mall. We took like a step, past those kind of automatic doors. As soon as we were in, my wife said, "Hold on for 1 second." And so she just went like right back outside. So I looked to see, what she was doing, because, you know, why would you just walk back outside, after taking one step in? And I saw her talking to that lady, and it was kind of, there was some gesturing and whatnot. So when she came back in, I asked, what was that all about? And she said, she said something to her daughter like, "Look at that black baby." And I guess she was, to be honest, that woman's color was the same as some of my kids or darker than other of my kids. So it was more a reference to me, and those are the children of someone black. You see what I mean? Um, and she just told her off like, "What's your problem?" And the lady was like, "Oh, I didn't mean anything by it, blah, blah, blah," because you can't really tell where my wife is from either. In that sense, she could be very easily mistaken to be an Arab or South Asian or something else like that. And she wasn't wearing clothes that are particular to any place. So she had no idea that either of us would understand what she was saying. And then basically the woman was like, "No, no, no, I don't mean anything by it." Basically like, "I'm not racist. Like, I just said something racist, but like, I'm not racist." I mean, you see what I mean? And, my wife just kind of like, put her in her place or checked her for that. And so even I feel like what my kids are going to have to deal with is more going to be anti-black racism that's expressed around them, but not at them. Meaning, you got to understand, there's not a history of a one drop rule like there is in the United States. So if you in America have any known African ancestry, you're considered black, regardless of how you look. I mean, you could have green or blue eyes, blonde hair, but if either it's known that you have black ancestors or you have some features which are not the stereotypical European features, meaning that blonde hair may be coily, it may be spirally. You may have um, a little bit of brownness to your skin, you know, uh, some other stereotypically African features could be slightly there, enough for people to feel like, you have some African in you. Those people are still called black, which in a way doesn't make sense, because if you hold up a black sheet of paper and a white sheet of paper, and then you say, your skin color is here, they would be much closer to the whiter sheet of paper. So it's much more of like an identity thing. Well, in other parts of the world, it's almost the opposite, meaning they, like, for example, I was in a classroom in Saudi Arabia, and these Arab kids were talking about another Arab kid, and they just said, "Oh, I mean, there's black kids in the class. Like, there are Afro Arabs as well as um, people who are Arab citizens, but they're literal Afro Arabs, like African Americans. Like, they're citizens of Arab countries, but they're of African descent, right?" And so he said, they were saying, "Teacher, this guy, he lives in Mecca, and whenever he goes there, all his friends are black, and he just listens to rap music, everything he does is black. Like, he's a nigger, teacher." And I was like, "What? Like, what did you just say?" You know what I'm saying? So I was like, we only here to study English, but like, okay, let's talk about English. Like, let's do some vocabulary right now. You know what I'm saying? Like, what does that word mean to you? Like, what you trying to say? And they were like, that's, and they didn't understand. Like, to them, it's like a slang word, because they're coming to that word from the perspective of rap music, watching various movies. They have their own racial slurs for everybody, including, Africans. So to them, they don't really know what that word means. It just means they understand nigga like what's up my nigga. They don't understand it like going all the way back to, the Europeans who actually invented that word. Which is why I don't say it, because it's like it's not a black word. Like it's a Latinate word. You know what I'm saying? Like using, Negro to mean black, that comes from, that's a Latin thing. It ain't nothing really African about it. You feel me? So anyway, that's another story. But they said, I said, so what? Like me? They were like, no, 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 teacher. Nigger means black. Very black, teacher. All the way black. Like Falata, Hausawi. And these are family names of like Hausa. And people from, like there's family names related to your tribe in Arabia. So even if your tribe is like not an Arab tribe, they still say, well, we're going to give you a last name based on what your tribe is. So just tell us what it is. And then that becomes your last name when you migrate over there. You feel me? So they gave those names out, meaning these people who are, I don't know what they mean, like, but they mean like pure African in that sense, like very, very dark. It's not possible that they have any blood in them besides African blood. And African blood in their eyes means extremely dark skin, right? Extremely broad features, extremely coarse hair. So if you have a little bit of laxity in your hair, if you have even my amount of lightness in my skin, which I don't consider my skin light, but for them, there are plenty of Arabs with this skin color or darker. You see what I mean? There are plenty of Arabs with broad lips. There are plenty of Arabs with broad noses. The original Arabs, like the real full-blooded Arabs, not the people who kind of acquired Arab culture and later identified as Arabs over the centuries. This is the normal skin color. The hair was a bit more relaxed, let's say, but it was still coily. So they don't consider just based on your skin color or nose or lips or anything like that, that makes you black. They mean you're black if you can't possibly be anything else. In America, it's basically you're white if you can't possibly be anything else. Meaning, if you don't have any known or visible African ancestry in America, you're white. It could be, you do a genetic test and whatever, but nobody knows and you didn't know and it's not visible, you see. So again, I mean, or if you talk about Brazil, they have a bunch of different words, um, preto, negro, pardo, branco, and there's a bunch more. I think there's like 50, you know what I mean? And again, like people, like you can see people in Southern Europe or Greece, who you would say they look mixed, like mixed African American, right? Or even light skin. But if you go to them and call them black, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a Spaniard, I'm Greek, whatever. I'm not an African migrant from whatever country, so how would you call me black? You see what I mean? Like, no one in my family has been called African that I know of. I mean, it could be that there's something there, but the point is, what is called black? Like, it's even hard for me to tell my children and put that on them, like, yo, you're black. Because I have a daughter that says, you're black, mommy's white, and I'm white. And it ain't like, there's nothing negative to it. She's just, in other words, like she's saying that with no weight on either of the words. She's not really attaching any stigma, positive or negative, to either word. She's just saying, I have mommy's color. I don't have your color. And so if I go to her, no, you're actually black. Why? Because, where I'm from, which you ain't there, but I'm from there, the fact that I'm your father means you are black and you got to call yourself that. I'm like, it would be hard for her to understand. It's not that I would never explain it, but when you really think about it, race is pretty arbitrary. It's not that there are no biological or phenotypical differences, but it's very similar to what people say about sex and gender. Biological gender is a fact, but whatever you choose to attach to it is up to you. Biological sex is a fact. Sorry. Biological sex is a fact. Meaning you're talking about what you physically observe of certain organs to be, if to be as simple as it can be put. However, what you choose to attach to it is up to you. What a person who has that should do versus what a person who has this should do. And likewise, skin color and other physiological differences are a fact. How are they not a fact? You can look at someone and say, you know, they look different than that person. Why? Well, there's this angle of their nose, or there's this breadth, or there's these ratios and proportions, there's this hair texture, this, whatever you want to look at. But whatever you choose, whatever labels you want to put on it are up to you. Whatever words you want to make up for it are up to you. I mean, to be honest, the word black makes no sense. There's not a single black person on this planet. Hardly. There are very few people who are like as black as the crayon that you have is black. Like you take that crayon on and you hold it next to my face, it's like it ain't the same color. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like this little thing right here is black, right? This battery is black. Is it like the same color as my skin at all? Like not even close. I mean, if you're a painter, and you're trying to match something to this color, you wouldn't reach for like the black oil and squeeze from that tube. You know what I mean? Like you would not do that. It's not the same at all. So obviously, race is a social construct relative to a given place. It doesn't mean nothing, but we make whatever meaning we want to out of it. So I'm kind of in a situation where it doesn't make sense for me to force the same meanings and interpretations in this context because it really is out of context. So I am going to have those talks with my kids, you know what I'm saying? And I know what I'm going to say because without going into this, identity studies speech about race as a construct, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a time and place for that. Police don't really check for philosophies. They kind of, what I'm saying, just hold out their little color card and say, okay, you look like this color, that's going to happen to you. At the end of the day, whatever philosophy you have, at certain points in American life, you're forced to check a box. Now, I'm going to end on this. Excuse me. And I just thought of something. America is the only country that I've ever been to where you actually check a box about your race, your background. So let me make something clear. There are people in, let's say, Pakistan, for example, in the same family. If they were in America, they wouldn't be considered the same race, and that would make no sense to them. Because whatever issues of race they have in their country, they don't consider two brothers and sisters or cousins to not be the same race, a mother and father to not be the same race. But some look European and some couldn't possibly be. So should they say that they're white? I mean, they don't do that. They just don't do. What shade of color are you? What hair texture are you? I mean, Oman, they don't do that. Nowhere I've been, anything I've ever applied for, it doesn't happen. Saudi Arabia doesn't happen. Pakistan doesn't happen. Nowhere else that I've traveled doesn't happen. So raising kids outside of the United States is actually a welcome relief. It's not that it's a racial utopia. There are racial issues, but the level of tension and the sense of danger isn't there. Prejudice is there, But where I've been, hatred is not there. Violence is not there. So all I can say is this: I'm grateful that I'm privileged enough to be able to have this conversation on my own terms. We can talk about ideals and moral platitudes, and yes, we can criticize and critique people who do the wrong thing, but I don't feel like my kids are going to tense up if I ever get pulled over by police. And I don't feel like I have to teach them how dangerous a situation like that could be. Like I may have to, at least to explain what my experiences could be if we were in the United States. So I'd love to know what kind of conversations other people with biracial children are having, or what you suggest should be said. If you have any suggestions for what I should tell my kids based on the situation, I would love to hear that too. And otherwise, I'm looking forward to seeing you follow and subscribe so that, more of this type of exploration can happen. And feel free to participate in any way, anytime. I look forward to it. Bye for now.